Thank you, Amanda. It's great to be here. I'm really impressed with the size of the group and the enthusiasm that I can feel from you all. And I'm glad that we share enthusiasm for the same thing, plants of this beautiful landscape of the Grand Staircase ecoregion. As Amanda said, I work for the BLM for Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument, but the plants don't stay in the boundaries of the monument. So you'll recognize these plants if you've hiked around here. I live in Kanab. I've worked for the BLM for the past year. Before that, I worked for Grand Canyon Trust, a conservation group, for 6 years. So I've worked in this region for quite a while, and I love it. So let's get started. We'll see this plant again later. Oh, I did want to recognize Juneteenth as well, and just the suffering that happened, and then the joy of ending slavery. But and if you haven't seen the movie about Harriet Tubman, she's amazing. So my thoughts for tonight are to share some of my enthusiasm for plants, and here I am jumping for joy. That's to try to express my enthusiasm. I'm at the toadstools there in Grand Staircase. I want to foster appreciation for wildflowers by you. I think you already shared that, but I want to increase it a little bit. I want to teach you a little bit about some plants, and it's just a little bit. Yeah, it's an ongoing process. I'm still learning plants. It's a never-ending process, and if you move somewhere else, then you have to start all over, and that's exciting and fun. You never stop learning botany. And I want to inspire you to learn more, and I'm going to give you some tools to help you learn more about plants. I first want to recognize that this land that we are on is the ancestral homeland of many indigenous communities, and we see some examples here representing indigenous communities. In particular, Southern Paiute, Hopi, Zuni, Pueblo, Dene, and Ute, and others. And as a botanist, I often think about how long could I live on this landscape with the plants and the animals as my only food source. No supermarkets, no Amazon delivery, no Costco in St. George, or I don't know where your nearest Costco is here. It would be challenging, wouldn't it, to live off the land? And so I really admire the native people that had that ability and that knowledge that they developed as communities over generations. So they are the original botanists and continue to be the botanists and stewards of this landscape. And just as background or as overview, I'm going to talk for 40 minutes or so, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. And I heard that this is being recorded and will be available online. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So the Grand Staircase region is really rich botanically. Many, many different species. Over 1,000 have been documented so far. And that's about a third, not quite a third of the plants of Utah are in Grand Staircase. And many endemics, meaning they don't grow anywhere else in the world because we have really distinct and unique soils and topography and hanging gardens and all kinds of places where plants can grow that are very different than Ohio, where you used to live, or other places in the world. So it's a pretty cool landscape. So just some tips for botanizing. I imagine you already do botanizing on your own, and it can be frustrating because there's so many plants out there, and I have the same frustration sometimes. I wish I knew them all, and I don't. So first of all, be patient with yourself as you're learning. Look for patterns in nature. Like I was talking to somebody about the number of petals. Who said 5 petals in rows? That guy. Yeah. Look for those patterns to help you kind of narrow down what the plants are or what family they're in. Because if you can narrow it down to a family, that eliminates a lot of things. And if you can narrow it down to a genus, that eliminates even more. So look for those patterns and look really closely. Don't just look at a plant from a distance. Get up close and look at the flower, look at the leaves, look at the form of the plant. Get out in nature. I think you already do that. Take photos, both a close-up and a far-away photo. Here's an example of one. It's the same plant, but here's a close-up where you can see the flowers. The the ones that are flowering right now and the ones that have already flowered up close, and you can see different parts of the flower. And this one gives you the setting, and this is a sagebrush community, and you can see the soil a little bit and the pinyon juniper. It just helps, like if you want to send a photo to me or put it on iNaturalist or something, it's really useful to have both a close-up and a faraway shot. That, in this case, try to get the whole plant and a little bit of the setting where it grows. With a tree, you can't always do that, if it's a ponderosa, but you can try. There's all kinds of apps and books. I'll talk about them towards the end. Also, respect indigenous knowledge. There's a temptation to say how indigenous people use plants, and if you know for sure from a reputable source, from indigenous people themselves and their knowledge, then I think it makes sense to share that kind of information. But don't speculate, don't make up stuff that you don't know about how indigenous people used plants. And don't assume anything is edible unless you're really certain. So today I'm going to focus on wildflowers because they're beautiful and spectacular and fun. But I do want to do just a little introduction to the other life forms that we have around here, trees and shrubs and cactus and things. So I'm just going to have one slide about these groups, well, one or a few slides to tease these other topics. And I'm going to be giving talks on these other groups in Kanab over the next year. I'll give you the dates at the end. Trees are probably the easiest group. They're big and there's not that many. You guys know cottonwood and ponderosa and pinyon and juniper. I do want to spend just a second on pinyon and juniper because they're so common around here and because they're so interesting to me. So I've been aging some of the trees at Tilted Mesa, a new mountain bike trail that the BLM has built by Kanab. It's 10 miles east of Kanab along the highway. And I went there last year and I saw that they had cut some branches for the trail. So the trail goes right by here, and they wanted to not have that branch poke people in the eye as they rode their bikes or walked. It's a hiking trail too, you can just walk on it. So since those trees were already cut, I thought this is an easy way to age some of the trees. So we cut some slices off some of the already cut branches, not the whole tree, just branches. And I'll pass these around in a second. And so I had a colleague at the Museum of Natural History in Salt Lake City help me sand these down and count the rings on these branches. Remember, these are not the full tree. These are just branches off of some junipers. This is this one. That's this one. This one's here. This is a pinyon pine, and those are junipers. Today, all I have is junipers. So, any guesses how old this one is? It's hard to guess. It's really, huh? 50 years? Closer. This one's 623 years old. So in this kind of setting where it's so dry and rocky, the trees grow incredibly slowly. And so the growth rings, a lot of them are just tiny. A lot of them are the size of a human hair. That's how little it rains and how slowly these trees grow. And so to age this one, you have to take photos of different photos and then zoom in, or I don't know how to zoom in, but and then count each ring. And you'll notice that some of the rings are wider, some are narrower, and the wider ones are wetter years, the narrow ones are drier years. So I'll pass this around. 623 years old. It's not one of those, but the oldest one we've documented so far is 726 years old, a branch. So the tree is at least a little bit older, if not a lot older. There's certainly 1,000-year-old trees there, and all over here. But it doesn't kill them. So this one is 190 years old. I'll pass these around. And this one is 170 years old. This one was dead when we cut it. This is insects, beetles or something that were getting into this one. Yeah. So at Tilted Mesa, It's a new mountain bike trail, and you can hike. We're going to put signs, little signs right next to these trees, and we've sanded the ones that we've aged, and there'll be a little sign that says this tree is 500 and whatever years old, or this pinyon is 322 years old. I think the oldest pinyon is, well, here. That one's 537. That one's 623. This one's 322. So fun little detour. Here's a close-up of the older one. This is an 1/8 of an inch right here. So, you know, an 1/8 of an inch is that much. So when you sand them down, it takes a lot of work to sand them down and then zoom in on the photo, and you can see some wider rings and some narrower rings, and just different climate from year to year. And that's.
And then what's the crack, or whatever that is?
This?
Yes.
I don't know. This branch was dead when we cut it. So 726-year-old branch. That's this branch right here. So the tree is quite a bit, well, somewhat older. Okay. So that's just a tease for future talks on trees, and for when you go to Tilted Mesa. We don't have the signs up yet, but they're coming soon. There'll be about 12 trees where you'll see sanded branches and signs that say how old they are. Shrubs, we have super cool shrubs around here, currants and oaks and sagebrush, and I think they're a lot of fun. Cactus are amazing. And I think a lot of people's favorite is the scarlet hedgehog cactus, or it's also called kingcup, Mojave kingcup cactus. Just spectacular, but I'm not going to spend any time on these.
Do you know the ages of some of the shrubs or the cactus? Some of the cactus are like hundreds of years old.
I don't know the age of cactus, but we did age, or did cut some stems of mountain mahogany and cliff rose, and they were over 100 years old at Tilted Mesa. They live a long time. And then grasses. Next month, I'm going to talk about grasses at the Kanab Library on August 14th. Grasses are the foundation of our ecosystem here. They support wildlife. They hold the soil together. They're cycling nutrients. They are really, really important. And we have amazing native bunch grasses and other grasses around here, like the Indian rice grass. Look how thick the Indian rice grass is here. And the needle and thread, this was taken last year. This is the photo, the same spot as the poster for this talk, where I'm holding up a stem of needle and thread grass that was over 4 feet tall by the Escalante River. Grasses, I hope you can tell I love grasses. But the star of the show, let's talk about wildflowers. I organized them here by color and genus, you know, similar plants, because some genera have plants of multiple colors. But I'm going to start off with white and move towards yellow and pink and different colors. So Cryptantha, some people call it the popcorn plant, because when it bursts out kind of like a popcorn ball. I think they're a fun plant. There's yellow ones and white ones. This one's called Jones Cryptantha. They were one of the early flowering plants this spring. This one I took just today. These photos I took just today. I was lucky enough to go out by the side canyon of the Colorado River, and Sacred Datura is a really important plant to Native people for ceremony and other uses. It grows in incredibly dry places. It's also called thorn apple. It has these big fruits. They're kind of spiky, like a thorn apple. I mean, that's not a real thing, but that's a descriptive name. This is the flower right here and there and there and there. And then up close, it's a really spectacular flower. It has really strong compounds, so really got to be careful. It's used in ceremony and different things. Yeah.
Is that whole plant poisonous?
The whole plant has really strong compounds. Yeah, don't eat it. whole plant has strong compounds, yeah. Yeah, I don't know a lot about the chemistry of the plant. I just know it's really powerful. Plants have compounds to try to deter insects from eating them and other critters from eating them, and then we use those compounds for health, hallucination, and all kinds of things.
I have that all over my ranger house, and it looks like some insects or something are eating it.
Huh.
And I don't know what to do because I'm in the area, so I just watch it. Yeah.
There's an ornamental plant that looks kind of like this too, another datura.
Well, that's what this is.
Okay, good.
I've already
Okay. I can't help you with your landscaping very, very much, but desert phlox was one you might have seen earlier this spring. It comes out pretty early and it forms these mats. It's kind of a mat forming plant. This one, desert phlox, has lots and lots of flowers, really pretty, and then these kind of spiky leaves. 5 petals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pay attention to that one. This one's kind of, I think, an interesting name, morning glory heliotrope. So you probably know morning glory from lawns, that white flower that is kind of tubular and opens up. So this is not a morning glory, but it looks kind of like morning glory, so they call it morning glory heliotrope. Grows in really sandy settings. So oftentimes plants are named after something else that they kind of look like. They're not that thing necessarily, but they look like that thing. Like mountain ash is not an ash, but it kind of looks like an ash, so they call it mountain ash, that kind of thing. Or alderleaf, mountain mahogany. This is a little tiny plant that you'll see around here. Townsendia, hoary Townsend daisy. It's only about that big, 2 or 3 inches, but has these beautiful composite flowers with the middle flowers are the disc flowers, and then the outer ones are ray flowers. Each one of those is actually a flower. Each petal is a flower, and each of those yellow disc flowers is a flower. So it's called the composite family because what we would call a flower is actually a composite of many flowers that are combined together. Snowball sand verbena. This one kind of looks like like this one, the morning glory heliotrope from a distance, but this one has a really snowball inflorescence. The inflorescence is the flowering part, so it has this cluster of flowers that look kind of like a snowball. Grows in really sandy settings. I think I took this one at coral pink sand dunes. And the sand grains stick to the leaves in an interesting way. And it has a fragrance. It's called Abronia fragrance. If you can learn the scientific names, it's helpful because the scientific name is the same no matter what. The common name could be anything. Different communities, different cultures, different people can call the same plant 2 or 100 different names, but it's always going to have the same scientific name. Until they change it, yeah. Until the taxonomists change it, you're right. Good point. And you can, if you know Latin or Spanish or French or Italian, you can sometimes learn a little bit about the plant from the scientific name. This one's a little bit fragrant. You have to get down on your knees in the sand and smell it, but it's a nice smell. The columbines are just so stunning. This one grows in our springs and hanging gardens in the Grand Staircase, Glen Canyon region. Before Lake Powell, there would have been more hanging gardens that got flooded that would have been full of this plant, but they're still here, growing on this cliff where water is seeping out. And they have these nectar, what are they called? forget, kind of pointing backwards, the flowers facing this way with all the female, male flower parts, and then this nectary, I can't remember what it's called, pointing backwards. Pretty distinctive flower, and they're kind of whitish, but also kind of pinkish as well. And then we have other species of columbines that grow in the mountains around here that are yellow or purple or white. But this one is endemic to the Colorado Plateau, and it only grows in these hanging gardens. So pretty unusual and important plant, I think. So this is a hanging garden. You can kind of see in the background. This is a wet wall with ferns and monkey flowers and other things growing on that wet wall. This one you're probably familiar with. It's super abundant in the spring. Trumpet flower. I think it gets that name because of this inflated part right here that maybe looks kind of like a trumpet. People always ask, what's that? Why does it have that, fatter part right here? I don't think we know for sure, but the logical reason I think is it helps it to blow in the wind. The wind catches it and blows it, and it tumbles and drops its seeds. It's an annual plant. You'll see thousands of them in the spring, and then in the summer and later fall, you'll see the dead stems like this that are kind of brownish. They start out green, and they have these tiny little yellow flowers, but they don't last very long. I think they look beautiful from a distance. That we'll cover, especially Smoky Mountain Road and different really dry clay soils.
They've always made me think of Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, Dr. Seuss. So again, if you know Latin, inflatum. There's an inflated portion of the stem. Eriogonum inflatum. Eriogonum. That's the buckwheat family. Eriogonums are popular. In fact, there's a meeting of the Eriogonum Society in September in the Zion region if you want to go. I'm going to try to go. It's $70. And this is a really hot spot for Eriogonums, the buckwheats. There's a bunch of different species that we have in this region, which is, it's a big family, and it's a fun family. There's all kinds of different plants, and there's some patterns you'll see in this family. This is an annual. A lot of the buckwheats are perennial. So now we're moving, with the last few, we're moving into the yellow flowers, Physaria, and what's the other group? I can't remember. There's another genus that's kind of like this. Starts with an L. That forms these little mats of beautiful flowers. These have 4 petals. Can you see 1, 2, 3, 4? I think this is the Brassicaceae family, the mustard family, if I'm not mistaken. Can anybody confirm that? No. The leaf shape is really important. This one has kind of what's called a spatulate, kind of a spoon-shaped leaf. And twin pod, this group has 2 seeds that grow like twins in a little bundle or together. Grows in really dry settings. We have a plant like this in the Kodachrome Basin area that's rare and endemic. Grows just in a small area of Grand Staircase, Kodachrome Basin. There might be a little bit in Arizona, but a rare plant. Lascorella, that's the other name I was trying to think of, Lascorella. Kodachrome bladderpod. Sand dune wallflower. This one you'll see, it gets pretty tall, 2 or 3 feet tall. And it'll often be kind of mixed in with some shrubs, sagebrush, or I think that's a juniper or a pinyon or something. But a pretty plant. 4 petals. Can you see the 4 petals? I think. In the mustard family. Yeah, the mustards all have 4 petals. So when you can start to learn those patterns, generally they're going to have either 3, 4, or 5 petals. And that's going to clue or narrow down the choices for you. So I showed you the white cryptantha at the beginning, the Jones cryptantha. This is the yellow one. Really, really pretty. Again, that kind of popcorn ball look to the inflorescence. Grows in really dry settings. It flowered earlier in the spring already. It's one of the first to flower around here.
Sometimes it seems like there's both white and yellow on the same plant.
Well, yeah. You're saying that sometimes it seems like there's white and yellow on the same plant, and
I think that's due to pollination. It's like with primrose, they change color when they pollinate.
huh?
I remember looking at a comic. Yeah, some of the yellow especially.
They're very.
A lot of white and yellow.
That is cool. She was saying the pollination might change the color after. Very cool. Princess Plume, I bet some of you or a bunch of you are familiar with this one. This one gets really tall. It can be 4 or 5 feet tall. It has these, I think, stunning, beautiful, long inflorescences that have lots of little flowers on them. Again, the mustard family. Then it has this is last year's flowers. So I took this about a month or 2 ago. It's really, flowers are the key thing to identify plants, but you don't always have flowers. So how do you identify them if you don't have flowers? It's hard, but you can get some clues by saying, okay, when it's flowering, look at the leaves and the other characteristics of the plant, and get familiar with those. Don't rely on the flowers alone, so that when the flowers are not there, you can still identify it. And then realize that it's going to look different in the fall than it does in the spring or the early summer. So it's kind of like, you see a friend and they have a haircut or they have a beard or they have different clothing on, and you just have to learn to recognize them at different times of their life cycle. And
Have you heard that called Hopi broccoli?
I have not heard it called Hopi broccoli, but a lot of things. Oh, cool. A lot of things have a word like spinach. Oh, cool. This part? Another plant in the mustard families that tend to be spicy, kind of like, what's the greens that's we eat? That's kind of arugula. Yeah.
I got that to grow in my yard 1 year, throwing the seeds in, and that was it.
Yeah.
But it got ripped out.
It does pretty well. It's a pretty tough plant. The evening primrose, I put a bunch of photos up here because there's just a bunch of different evening primroses, and they're just stunning, especially when you get these fields like we get around here in the spring. Here they are up close. 4 petals, so this is a different family, Onagraceae, but it also has 4 petals. But if you can see that it has 4 petals, there's only a relatively small number of families that have 4 petals. The mustards and the evening primrose are a few of them. The tufted evening primrose, tufted meaning it grows from a clump, whereas this evening primrose kind of spreads out, or it looks like it spreads out because it has all these different stems, and it forms these fields that are really pretty in the spring. And then somebody was saying that the color changes when they're pollinated. I thought it was just later. Could be either one.
Could be either way.
But the name Enothera cespitosa, is the term for growing from a clump. So in grasses, that's a really important characteristic too. Does it grow from a clump or does it spread out with rhizomes? This one grows in wet areas, this long stem evening primrose, and this one can be 3 or 4 feet tall. Here you can see the 4 petals, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see the style and stigma and the male and female parts. If you get into botany, you have to look at those. But here, this one's growing by willows. This is coyote willow. So this is right in a channel. So the other thing with plant identification is, where is it growing? Is it growing in a really dry area? Is it growing in a really wet area? Some plants only grow in wet areas. We call that obligate wetland. Some plants only grow in really dry areas. We call that obligate upland. Some plants can do a little bit of both. But if you can narrow down the setting, it really helps you, or if you know the setting, it helps you narrow down the possibilities. Because we don't have hardly any evening primroses that grow in wet areas. That's the main one. Beautiful family or group. Oh, you remember this one? We did. I guess I really like this. Here you can see, these are the seed pods of the Princess Plume. The mustards often have these long seed pods. They're called siliques, I think these are called. There's also silicles, which are the more round things like pepperweed has, more of a lentil, a flat lentil shape. There's a lot of yellow flowers. Some people have terms of non-endearment for these kinds of plants because they're hard to identify. Again, a composite in the composite family. So each one of these petals is a flower. Each one of these are the ray flowers. Each one of these disc flowers in the middle is a flower. It's called the sunflower family. You can recognize the look, the sunflower look. I think the nerved part refers to the nerves on the petals. There's four nerves on the petals. Stemless is a little bit confusing because this looks like a stem, but this is really just the flower part, and so it doesn't really have much in the way of stems. Acaulis means no stem or stemless. Botany terms can be confusing. So this is the one from the opening slide. This is a favorite of mine, and I think a favorite of a lot of people. So this is a stream on the left, kind of in the Escalante Canyons region, a little tributary to the Escalante River. So this is all monkey flower here, and this is a spring coming off the rock wall and supporting this monkey flower. Opposite leaves here, that's another really important characteristic. So plants generally have either opposite leaves, meaning the leaves come off opposite each other, or alternate leaves, meaning there's a leaf and then not a leaf until further up, and they kind of alternate. That's the two general growth forms of plants. Yellow flowers, somebody told me it's named after the Curious George, the guy with the yellow hat. That seems like a really weird way to describe a plant, but there's no other monkey characteristic to this plant, so I guess it's better than anything else I can think of. But really yellow flowers, and then these red little dots and hairs on the petal are pretty interesting. You can see this is a wet wall. The water's just seeping off this wall. So this is one of those obligate wetland plants. It cannot grow in the sandy, dry areas, around here. It's only going to be where there's constant water. And it's not a very tough plant as far as the stem being strong or deeply rooted or anything. So it generally grows in springs because springs don't have high flows like the stream does. When we have spring runoff, you get that big flow flowing, and you need to be strong rooted if you're going to live next to a stream that has a snowmelt hydrograph. And that is true with willows, sedges, rushes, those plants, birch, alder. A lot of them have flexible stems. They bend over. That's why willows are so good for basket making, because they're very flexible. And that's a great characteristic to have if you grow in a place where you get these rushing waters in the spring or the monsoon, summer as well. So I was saying these grow not along the stream per se, but at springs where you just have a gentle flow all the time, steady groundwater discharge. A very distinctive or descriptive, helping you to understand that this is a spring. Diagnostic, I think that was the word I was looking for, diagnostic. Speaking of springs, but totally different meaning, spring parsley is called spring parsley because these flowers often come out in the spring. These are some of the first to flower in the mountains and the deserts of Utah. There's a whole bunch of different plants in this. This is the carrot family. You'll notice it looks a little bit like, what's the herb that we put in our Mexican food? Cilantro, or the carrot and the parsley. Those leaves look kind of like this, kind of like that. Same family. It's the Apiaceae family. Be really careful with this family. A lot of them are edible, but some of them are not. The one that's definitely not is what's the one that Socrates ate to kill himself? Water hemlock, yeah. So that one you don't want to eat. So if you don't know plants, don't eat it. This one's called wide-wing spring parsley because it has these wings on the seeds. They're a little bit hard to see here, but a whole bunch of wings, these flat features that stick out. Fendler's spring parsley. A lot of plants are named after people. Did you guys hear about birds? They're getting rid of names of people, of birds. I think that's cool, or I think that's good because people have questionable histories. It's harder with plants because there's just so many plants. There's not as many birds. So I haven't heard of any discussion of trying to get rid of the people names with plants, but I kind of would like that to happen. This one grows in really sandy areas. Again, like that snowball sand verbena, the sand grains stick to the leaves. This used to be called the umbelliferae family, the umbel family, and an umbel is like an umbrella. You know, there's the stem of the umbrella and then all those spokes. And this family has these umbel flowers. So here's the stem, like the stem of the umbrella, and then you can sort of see all the spokes. Sometimes it's more obvious than others. They changed the name of this family to Apiaceae, the carrot family, parsley family. This one's flowering right now. Just the other day I was up on Scudampaw Road and saw just a ton of this trefoil. If you speak French or a Latin language, you'll recognize the 3 leaves, trefoil, and it has, not always, but oftentimes it'll have 3. These are actually leaflets, but they often have these 3 leaflets, and so it's called trefoil. Keep in mind that our names are not always perfect, and nature doesn't follow our rules, but it can help. Has these pretty little yellow flowers that have a reddish calyx, I think it's called, the outer part of this flower. Has anybody seen this one recently? I saw it in a sagebrush grassland just 2 days ago. It was pretty abundant. I should say, this is the pea family. So if you think of a pea pod, you can kind of see that pea pod growth form here. And that can really help you narrow down the choices. If you recognize, or if you see that pea pod growth form, that can help you say, this is the Fabaceae, the pea family. And then it eliminates a lot of things. The bird's foot is kind of another way of saying trefoil. It kind of looks like the feet of a bird, the 3 little toes. And they've changed the name of this one. Used to be, it's Lotus utahensis. If you remember the old name, you can always look it up, type it up, and then it'll tell you the new name. It's now called Actomecon or something like that. Milkweeds. Milkweeds are a lot of fun. They're called milkweed because the stem, if you break it, there's a white sap that comes out. You've probably seen that when you shouldn't be picking milkweeds, but you might have seen that. This is our common one, the showy milkweed that gets pretty tall, and the monarch butterflies need that one to eat. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday called In Defense of Plants. Does anybody know that podcast? And they interviewed somebody talking about milkweeds, and it's a fascinating, they call it, in botany sometimes people call it an arms race between the plants and the insects that use those plants, and the plants develop a compound, and then the insects figure out how to get around the compound, or in the case of milkweeds, they actually utilize, the butterflies utilize the compounds from the plants. What are they using for? I can't remember. Yeah. So like they're taking the weapons that the plants made and using them as their own weapon. Pretty cool. So you'll see a pattern in this plant of this kind of ball inflorescence, rounded inflorescence. That's often the case in this milkweed Asclepias family. Macrosperma, this means big seed, sort of big seed, I guess. This one grows in drier areas. This one grows in a little bit wetter area. I have another milkweed growing in my yard called, what's it called? Spider milkweed? No, I forget the name. Really important for pollinators. Sega lily, our state flower of Utah. I think a favorite of a lot of people, just a really showy, beautiful flower. This is the common one in northern Utah, and the bulbs are edible. Supposedly, indigenous people taught the settlers to eat this plant, and that helped them survive. That's the story. So the white one is common in northern Utah. And we have a little bit down here too. This winding Mariposa lily has a winding stem oftentimes, and very different color, yellow. Purple with a little bit yellow inside. And then the very yellow one, the golden Mariposa lily, that grows at a little bit higher elevations around here. This one was, I think, up by Canyon Peak area, kind of closer to Escalante. A beautiful family. This one was just across the river in Bears Ears, I think. So another wetland plant. This one is only going to be found where there's constant water. It's called stream orchid. I would like to call it spring orchid because it's more common at springs than, oftentimes we have springs and streams together. So I can see why they would call it stream orchid. But Epipactis gigantea, it's a really big, tall stem. So that's probably why it gives the name gigantea. It can be, for an orchid, it's tall, 2 or 3 feet tall. And it can grow in these pretty dense patches along. Where I see it typically is where there's a spring coming into a stream. Because again, it's not super strong and able to withstand high flow. But that typical orchid, non-symmetrical flower with that, I think they call this the lip. Can't remember all the terminology, but a different, not like a sunflower that's very symmetrical, looks the same all the way around. It's very distinctive lower part of the petal or flower.
We have that in our hanging garden.
Oh, the one by the dam? That's a cool spot. Is it flowering now, or it's done? This one I think was taken at a side canyon of the Colorado, just upriver a bit. So the globe mallows, I wish the color was a little better. Gosh, I should. Can you see the orange? Can you see the orange there? It's a very orange flower. We have a number of different globe mallows here. You can just call them all globe mallows, but if you want to get into it, they have different leaf shapes. Look how deeply dissected these leaves are versus this leaf, which is only slightly dissected. This one's called little flower globe mallow. This is the common one that you'll see just covering a lot of our fields. I have it in my yard. I love it. I think it's great. This one, Gracilarifolia, I think it's called, because it looks like a gooseberry. So it's named after the gooseberries, which has nothing to do with this plant except for the leaf. Looks kind of similar. We have some rare globe mallows. We have Smoky Mountain globe mallow. It grows nowhere else in the world except right up above us here on Smoky Mountain. I think all the globe mallows are orange. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I've got a pink one, but I got it at the nursery.
Okay, nurseries nurseries don't count.
When I was a child growing up here, the globe mallow was all over this whole mesa.
Yeah.
The kids called it, they would say, watch out, it gives you pink eye.
Pink eye. That plant or a different plant? Globe mallow? So don't get globe mallow in your eye.
It's probably a good rule of thumb, don't get your eye.
This one was really popping about a month ago, driving from here to Flagstaff and here to Kanab. Paintbrushes are a fun group. We have this really tall paintbrush around here. I don't know if you've seen it, but it can grow 3 or 4 feet tall in southern Utah, probably around here. There's other paintbrushes that just grow, 6 inches to a foot tall. There's a whole bunch of different paintbrushes. They can be reddish, they could be orangish. We have yellow and pink, all kinds of different colors of paintbrushes. When I say of those different colors, a lot of those are more in the mountains. Here in the desert, they tend to be orange or red. Beautiful plant. Castelleja linearifolia, so linear leaf. Look how long and linear those leaves are, so that helps you. The Wyoming part does not help at all. So I don't really like when plants are named after a place unless it's really only in that place. Canada geese, we have Canada geese everywhere.
Of course, Castelleja is the
Castelleja
botanist.
is what?
Was a Spanish botanist.
Ah. Sand dock, these grow in sandy areas, so that helps. Has these really big leaves, and then these inflorescences with really abundant flowers and seeds. We have a few different docks. I don't know why they're called docks, but
Are they edible?
yeah, I think they were and are important for communities. I think some people call it rhubarb, wild rhubarb. I've never eaten it, but I've heard Navajo refer to it as rhubarb. Do you want to say anything about it?
I can't get stuff from the nursery to grow, but you can get the ones that you get out from here when somebody digs up and I recently had to take one out to move it for some people, and there was like all these giant sweet potato roots underneath, and I took the whole bag full of them, except for two for me, out to the chapter house, and they were happened to be having a medicinal talk with plants in the area that night.
Wow.
And they were so grateful to have those show up.
Oh, great. Great story. Yeah, I don't know much more about this one, but it's pretty distinctive because it's got those really big leaves that are like 10 inches long in some cases. Okay, good. Penstemons are a favorite of mine and a lot of people. They can be all kinds of different colors. We have generally two red penstemons. The Utah penstemon, with the Utah penstemon, the petals kind of flare out, whereas with the penstemon etonii, which is also called, what's the common name? Firecracker penstemon, the petals stay a little more closed, or more just tubular. So that's the way it's easy to distinguish the two red ones that we might have around here, firecracker versus Utah penstemon. Then there's all kinds of purple and pink and blue penstemons. They can get pretty big. They do well even along roadsides. I was driving through Idaho recently, and there was a whole bunch of, I think, firecracker penstemon. And so this is a case where you want to get to know the leaves when the flowers are there, because like this, sometimes you look at that and say, what is that? I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's just a bunch of leaves. But if you get familiar with the leaf shape and pattern, this is an opposite leaf plant, so they're going to grow opposite of each other, not alternate. And that'll help you. I don't know, you can't really see it, but there's two there, two there. Here, let's see the pair there. Opposite is a little less common than alternate, so if you see it opposite, it narrows down the options. This is on the trail by Kanab, right on the north end of town by the Jacob Hamlin Park. You can just go up the mesa. A lot of penstemons there. Can you hear me okay, Amanda? I need to talk louder, sorry. So I mentioned the pea family earlier. It's a big family. The Astragalus genus, the milkvetches, are really challenging because you really need the flowers and the seed pods to identify them correctly. But you can know that it's a pea family by the seed pods. Can't see them very well here. I should have got a better photo of a seed pod, but they have a long, kind of curved pea pod. Utah penstemon, or Utah milkvetch, or woolly milkvetch, is a common one we have around here that's really woolly, a lot of white hairs on the leaves and even on the flowers. Astragalus mollissimus, woolly milkvetch. Some of these can be difficult for animals to eat or toxic. They also call it loco weed because it can be harmful to animals that eat it. A pretty group, challenging to identify. So thistles, do you love thistles? Trick question. There are native thistles. I want to be really clear that not all thistles are bad. These are native thistles. This is Caneville thistle. We also around here have the Arizona thistle that looks like that, with that sort of long inflorescence compared to some of our non-native thistles. The Scotch thistle is the one you might be more familiar with. It just takes over in urban areas, fields, in Kanab and other parts of Utah. We just have a ton of Scotch thistle in disturbed settings. So just be aware that thistles, there's a whole bunch of native thistles. I think we have 15 or 20 native thistles in Utah. They're important for pollinators. This one grows in wet areas. We have another one that grows at springs. Cirsium rydbergii grows in the hanging gardens along with the monkey flower and the columbine. It's a native thistle. And I say this because sometimes I see thistles that have been stomped on and cut probably by hikers. Like I'll be on a trail and I'll see a bunch of stomped on broken thistles. And sometimes they're native and people think they're doing something good by killing a thistle, but a lot of times they're native. So please don't kill thistles unless you've been trained and you're part of a weed management crew. There are really problematic thistles, no doubt. Scotch thistle, musk thistle, bull thistle. We have some really problematic thistles, but we also have some native ones that are important. I made my little speech. This is a really fun one. You probably saw this spring. It's still flowering. I just saw it 2 days ago flowering up on Scudampaw Road. It's pretty tricky when it's just in the leaf stage. It looks kind of like an onion or not an iris, but that group of plants that are kind of fleshy leaved. So you really want to get to know it when it has the flowers because there's not many things like that around here. It's called spiderwort. It's a strange name. Anybody know where that comes from? I have no idea. Germany?
I suppose the wort.
Oh, the wort part, but the spider part, I don't know what that comes from, but just the stunning purple flower with the yellow anthers. Those are the male flower parts that have the pollen in them. And then the female part is the stigma that would be somewhere in the middle. So when you see the flowers, enjoy the flowers, but then stop looking at flowers and look at the leaves and get familiar with those so that when you see it in its non-flowering stage, which is a lot of the year, you can recognize it. And the other thing is you can look for old flowers. Like I think these are some old flowers, and that'll help you. It's flowering right now. Has anybody seen this one recently? In your yard? Wow.
We saw it by Cobra Arch last year.
They're pretty. And they can be pretty abundant in certain places. All right. How am I doing time-wise? I probably went a little longer. Yeah. So I'm about done, but I do want to mention that there are rare plants around here. These are some of them. This is the bladderpod that I mentioned, and a lot of them grow on distinctive soils or settings. I just want to mention one, Welsh's milkweed, that has a really limited geography. It's in southern Utah and a little bit in northern Arizona, mainly coral pink sand dunes, and then right around there. It grows nowhere else in the world. A really interesting plant. So some tools for plant identification. I know some of you are not as tech savvy. We have different degrees of technology, love or hate, whatever. But iNaturalist is a pretty powerful tool for identifying plants because you can take a photo of a plant on your phone. It'll document where it is. You can make a guess of what you think it is. Go ahead and guess, that's fine. And it'll give you some ideas. I think it's this, or it'll suggest different things. You can choose one, and then people will look at that. People like me and others will look at it and say what it is. They'll type in on the computer what that plant is, and we can do that from our home computer and help you identify a plant. So like somebody showed me a mushroom. Who was it? Photo. Is he gone? I didn't know the species, but you can post things, plants, animals, dead animals, mushrooms on those, and people will help you identify. So pretty powerful tool. Try iNaturalist. There's also a whole bunch of books and apps and websites, and I made a resource document that I call Plant Identification Resources for the Colorado Plateau. for Grand Canyon Trust. You can find it, if you search Grand Canyon Trust, plant identification, it'll pop up. So it lists books and apps and floras and websites and different tools for identifying plants. You can also send me photos. I'm happy to look at them, but if you put them in iNaturalist, I look there and I identify other people's plants sometimes, and other people do too. So it's a way to get more help than just one person.
So this is an app?
It's an app and a website, both. So you can look at iNaturalist and say where you are, and it'll just show what other people have seen in your area recently or ever. So it's a pretty handy way to just look and see what people are identifying in your area. Just some upcoming events I mentioned. I'm going to be talking in Kanab. I have a lecture series. And then a friend of mine is going to talk about lichens as well. So these are the next 8 or 9 months of talks that I'm going to do in Kanab. And I could do some more here as well, perhaps. One talk that might be particularly interesting here for this group is I did some field work where we went up the side canyons of the Colorado River 2 years ago when the water was really low, and we documented the plants that were coming back after the water had receded. And just spoiler, the plants that first come back tend to be weedy, but over time, and in this case, going up the river, there was more and more native plants as we went upriver, and there was more time for the native plants to establish. So to me, that was good news. We don't know for sure if that's going to happen everywhere, but it was exciting to see that. I gave a talk about that at this symposium, symposium on the Grand Staircase region. We hold that in March every year in Escalante and on Zoom. We've done it for 3 years. We have talks about plants and water and geology and paleontology and indigenous perspectives. And oftentimes we have music and art and various other things. It's a really interdisciplinary symposium that I'm really proud to be part of. Our next one will be March in Escalante and on Zoom. And you can watch all those talks on the Escalante River Watershed Partnership YouTube channel. So if you type in Escalante River Watershed Partnership in YouTube, it'll show you the talks, and there's 20 to 30 talks every year on those topics that I mentioned. Has anybody watched or been part of that? A few people, yeah. That's really good. All right. I do have some Flickr albums. You can search my name in Flickr and go, and I have all these different albums like Kanab area, Grand Staircase, Glen Canyon, Henry Mountains, and different things in Flickr, which is just a place to store photos and share photos for free. And there's my email if you want to send me. I didn't put my work email because I'm doing this talk on my own time as a volunteer. I'm happy to do it because today's a holiday and I didn't want to do BLM work on a holiday, but so there's my personal email. All right, made it. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here, and I can tell you're enthusiastic about plants, and that makes me happy. So I'm happy to take some questions.
So I have a question. My dad, long time ago, he was an agronomist and strip talking and all that. He told me that in any type of flower, you can never have yellow, red, and blue. All three.
In the same flower?
In the same flower. Like a rose, for example.
Say it again, yellow, red?
Yellow, the three primary colors.
Yellow, red, and blue?
You can get purple, but you can't get blue. You can get... Anyway, I just wondered if you had ever heard that. My dad told me that a long time.
Never heard of that.
It's got to be true. That's right.
Yellow, red, and blue.
But I haven't seen it. I haven't seen plants with all three colors.
Yeah. I bet you can. I bet nature doesn't like to follow the rules that we make up. Amanda?
I've heard that there are quite a few plants out of top of Powell
Powell Point between Escalante and Henryville?
Yeah,
Yeah. You've heard that there's a lot of endemic plants, is that you said? I have not heard that. That geology, that soil is pretty distinctive. So maybe that's the case. I have not heard that. Yeah, the endemics often are on soils that are very distinctive. That's where a lot of rare plants grow. Like in the Uinta Basin, there's very distinct or unique soils. And Smoky Mountain, there's very distinct soils, so we have rare plants there. Sometimes they're gypsum types of soils or soils with a lot of selenium or just things that make them kind of unusual. And certain plants have adapted to grow there, but a lot of plants can't grow there. So soil, if you can learn soils, that really helps with plants. Since you mentioned Powell Point, one cool thing about Powell Point is the number of conifers that are up there. I think there's 8 or 9 conifers. And I got a photo with 7 conifers in one photo, which was really cool. Limber pine and Doug fir and different junipers and pinyon and ponderosa and white fir. Little side note. Yeah. Bristlecone's up at Powell Point too, yeah. I have not aged the bristlecones. In that case, you would need to cut the entire tree, and I don't want to do that. But if there was one that died on its own, I might take a slice of it. I'll keep an eye out. Bristlecone and ponderosa can be old. I'm starting to work on a guide to help people recognize old trees versus young trees because they have different growth forms, and there's not always a strong relationship between size and age. Like, I hope no one stole my cookies. Oh, she's got them. So that one that was 600 years old, it's only about this big. My colleague showed me a juniper that was this big that was only 80 years old. And the difference is water. It was growing in a wetter area with good soil. So age and size don't correlate really well. So I want to help people understand that better.
Is there some sonar device or something yet, maybe a Star Trek device that will penetrate and count the rings?
Not that I know of. No. I'll mention that you've probably heard of coring trees where you drill a hole into a tree like a ponderosa, and if you hit the middle, then when you pull it out, you can count the rings. That works well for softer woods like ponderosa and some of the spruces and firs and things. It doesn't work well with juniper. That's why we cut those slices, because juniper is such a hard wood. And it doesn't always grow symmetrically, so if you don't hit the middle, if you don't hit the oldest part, you might hit the middle, but that might not be the oldest part. So, or you might break your bit. That's the worst thing.
You answered one of my questions about forest sapling. The other one was, I've been here for about 20 years. I've never seen a bloom in this area like last year.
Yeah.
It was phenomenal.
Yeah, the rains really made it pop.
How did that stack up there since they've been keeping records? Was this like
I don't know of any records of bloom density or beauty or anything, but it was a good year. This year was pretty good too, but last year was just amazing. Yeah.
What plans are being made to combat the tumbleweed?
Tumbleweed. So, people are really interested in landscaping. Landscaping is not my specialty, but I am going to do a talk on landscaping with native plants as the last in my series, because I want to give people as many tools, as much understanding of the native plants as you can, because the key with preventing or dealing with weeds is to get the native plants to grow. Help the native plants to grow, or don't kill the native plants in the first place. Because where we get weeds is where we've removed native plants with vehicles or animals or people, whatever. And then there's a lot of bare ground. And most of the weeds that we have problems with put out many, many, many seeds, kind of a shotgun approach. And if they land on bare ground, that's where they can grow. So what you don't want is bare, disturbed soil where those weeds can grow, whether it's Russian thistle, which is also called tumbleweed, or stork's-bill. I have so many stork's-bill in my yard that I pull. Tumble mustard. Those are the plants that, cheatgrass, that just put out a ton of seed. And they're going to grow where there's bare soil, but they're not going to grow very well or as abundantly if you have lots of native plants and if you have biocrust. I didn't talk too much about biological soil crust, but I'm a big fan of biological soil crust. It makes it harder for the cheatgrass and the Russian thistle to grow. Russian thistle is an annual plant. A lot of these weeds that we're talking about are annual plants. So if you can get your perennials, help those perennials to thrive, the Indian rice grasses and the sagebrush and the wildflowers, the penstemons and the globe mallows. That's the best thing you can do.
What do you do though when there's a canyon that's literally chock full of a 40-foot tall wall of thistles and you can no longer traverse? Can we burn those, or what's the best way?
I've seen those thistle dams. They are impressive. I'm not going to advocate burning, but I think it would be interesting if somebody tried it.
And on that note,
No.
folks, thank you so much for coming out tonight. One more round of applause for our speaker.